This week on Market to Market,
This is a very cutting-edge research.
scientists uncover clues to possible COVID-19 treatment from pig cells.
The market goes up.
And commodity market analysis with Chris Robinson. Market to Market, the weekly journal of rural America. Hey everybody, it's Paul Yeager. Welcome inside the MTOM podcast studio here at Iowa PBS. And it's starting to look a little bit different. Over the coming weeks and episodes, we'll be showing you some of the changes, talking to those that are making the changes as we jump forward in podcasting, both in audio and those of you watching us here on video. Today, we're going to talk cotton. We're going back to the south to Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. Andrew Jordan, he's an advisor with the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. Yes, we've talked about the protocol before, but there's something that has come up that has made this in the news again, and it's about sustainability. We're going to discuss water verification, data, and also an extension that's happening to the protocol and how growers can get enrolled. But now, let's hop in our conversation with Dr. Andrew Jordan. All right, Dr. Jordan, the big question is, when it comes football season, you've got a recent national champion and an even more recent national champion in your academic study background. So in your undergraduate and your graduate, did you ever focus on class, or did you maybe skip away for a Saturday afternoon at either Death Valley or there in Athens?
Well, I didn't have to skip away because I was with the crowd. At University of Georgia and also at Clemson, I've had the distinct ability to be able to claim a national championship 2 years in a row. That was when Georgia had the national championship before the playoffs, and then Clemson the following year. And then recently, I really liked Clemson, especially when they were playing Alabama a lot of times. And then we had the opportunity with Georgia and Alabama. So it's been really fun to being a winner.
Yeah.
I was a loser sometimes, but winners most of the time.
I want to ask you about Clemson real fast. It is being in an I state where I'm at, I'm always fascinated with the agriculture stories that come out of Clemson. What's the focus of the university there and its contributions and how it shaped you?
Well, Clemson is a really fascinating place. It's like most of the land-grant colleges, they are located in areas which not the major agriculture. And looking back historically, that's where the land was cheap. So, with their land grants that put agriculture in the mountains where there's no agriculture. Or happened in Georgia. Athens was not a particular agricultural center because the best land was somewhere else. You didn't want to put buildings on it. So what made Clemson such a powerhouse? I think it's the leadership early on. We had some really great leaders in the administration, and they had the vision to position agriculture, research, extension, so that it would really have maximum effectiveness. Now, I can say the same thing about Georgia.
Right. Well, are you a Georgia native, a South Carolina native?
I'm a Georgia native.
You are? Where at?
Actually, I was raised in the coastal plains of Georgia on a general farm, cotton, small grains, and beef cattle. And back in 100 years ago, when I was a kid, exaggerating just a little bit, labor became such an issue with enterprise going on in competition for labor. We began to shift more to beef cattle. That's something my dad and I and my brothers could care for. So you might say I'm from a cotton and beef cattle farm.
Well, why not stay on the farm? What prompted you to depart and do something different?
Listen, it's really interesting. I had this conversation with my dad. I remember one of the last conversations. I was finishing up my PhD at Clemson. And at that time, many farmers were getting highly leveraged and going into agriculture. And I remember the conversation. I came home and I visit on the weekend. I said, Dad, I decided I wanted to stay on the farm and be in agriculture. He said, oh, really? Yeah. Well, tell me about it. he said, well, where's your land? I said, well, it's the whole home place. He said, you realize you've got 6 brothers and sisters. So what are you going to do for them? You go buy it? Oh. And I, yeah, Dad, I can, I'll borrow the money. Well, what about your equipment? Well, I said, we've got the equipment on the farm. I said, that's not you. That belongs to, when I go, it belongs to the family. Oh, yeah, okay. So, and you intend to borrow money for all this, right? I said, oh, yeah. So you can see that I was very naive. And he said, son, I suggest you continue your career in agriculture. So the point is, he was wise, saying we don't have enough land. And this was a time when everybody else was getting so highly leveraged. And just a few years later, it crashed around those people who did that. So it was wise advice. Sometimes I'm still kind of grumpy he didn't let me stay there.
Well, but that debate hasn't changed. There's farmers with children who think maybe like you were, and they've had that realization, and that's still a debate that was then, it is now. There's not enough land for somebody who wants to start, or it's a lot of hurdles to get over. So that hasn't changed. But
That's right.
so was cotton always a focus for you, or what was your focus in undergrad and grad work?
My undergraduate was agriculture and engineering. And in fact, also my master's, and then my PhD was engineering, but still had a focus on, my PhD had a focus on agriculture, but also environmental science. So that was beginning at a time when, actually, I think Clemson was the first of the institution I was aware of that had a environmental engineering degree. And a friend of mine, Dr. Calvin Parnell, ended up at Texas A&M, was, I think, one of the very first students out of that program of environmental engineering. So, so cotton per se was not my focus. I happened to do some research in cotton in my master's work, but my PhD was actually in aquaculture. I was developing aquacultural systems for harvesting oysters that would not do damage to the bottom of the estuaries and bays where oysters in South Carolina were grown. So I've had a wonderful. I've enjoyed every job, every position I've ever done, from aquaculture to later to telecommunications, with working with AT&T, and then aerospace, where I was helping to train aerospace engineers on structural design. And I'll go ahead and answer the obvious question. You're a guy with an agriculture engineering degree. How in the heck are you teaching people how to build airplanes? My answer is this: engineering is applied physics. Applied physics goes across many spectrum. The fact that I was focusing on agricultural engineering systems, they're translatable. And then you get into aerospace, and okay, we will learn the way that Lockheed designs its structures, designs its aerodynamics, its electronics, and so on. So it's applied physics.
Well, I think you've hit on something that I find sometimes people who have different backgrounds than what the traditionally thought of path is have a better insight and can teach more to someone than, yes, you could have had somebody that went through all the aerospace, all that engineering, and then worked in that industry. But you provide a different insight to help people think broader than what their spectrum is. Is that accurate?
I think that's correct.
Okay. So then how do you make the transition then back into agriculture?
Actually, that was the prime question. I was working in aerospace. We had the contract at that time, the largest contract, building the C-5A aircraft, which, by the way, the design, Boeing was competing for the same contract, and they lost the contract. What Boeing did, they took their design for the C-5A and put it into what they call a 747. So that was the time when those were built. So, I lost the focus of the question. So,
Well, no, just how did you make the transition back into agriculture?
yeah, well, our contract was running out. We delivered on the contract, and I was there during the phase of build up. We were hiring thousands of engineers all over the world and bring them in and teach them, well, this is how Lockheed does engineer. So I was beginning to look at, wow, I'm having to lay off people on my staff now, and they have to look for a job. And I was thinking, I'm not ready to be laid off. So in my naivete, I said, I really want to, not at naivety, to get back to agriculture. I said, I really want to get back to agriculture. So I made some calls at Clemson University about getting a fellowship. Yeah, we can get you a fellowship. I'd like to do that. And I'm saying, okay, I'm going to go from a 5-figure job down to a 4-figure job. This was back in the early 70s. $15,000 a year was a lot of money. And $4,000 a year scraping by as an assistantship. But I had it in my mind that I would get layoff benefits at Lockheed and I could make a transition. And so I went to the director of the division and said, I want to volunteer for layoff. And he reacted, you don't do that. You don't volunteer. Layoff is our decision. We intend for you to be here for the dust settles. So I'd made a decision to move. So I moved and didn't get these layoff benefits, which I intended, but it worked out. That was a torturous way to get back into agriculture. I don't regret one moment of it.
Was there a reason that a lot of your focus is on cotton now? Was there a reason you picked up that specific commodity?
I didn't pick it. It picked me. There was an opening at the National Cotton Council, and the director of the National Cotton Council called one of my office mates, one of the professors, said, hey, we're looking for somebody that can help us in so-and-so. And my major professor came to me. I was in the laboratory doing some work and said, hey, I got this call. Would you be interested in talking to this man about a position? And I had no clue. I had my focus. I'm going to be a professor. I'm going to be really smart and do all this fun stuff in the laboratory and in the field. And I took the pitch. Yeah, I talked with him. And, from there, this conversation goes on and on. And he said, well, in this phone interview, said, well, I'd like to come visit. Oh, yeah, I'd love to. I thought that I was talking to another organization. I thought I was talking with Cotton Incorporated rather than National Cotton Council. So I was making plans to get in my car and drive up to Cary, North Raleigh, Durham area. And my professor said, no, that you're going to the wrong place. It's Memphis. Anyway, it's all these weird stories of kids. I was still a kid, even though I had 3 kids at that time of the South. You might say I was a mature graduate student because I had a lot of background in telecommunications and aerospace. But
again, it's that varied background that you bring that provides some different insight to people and different ways of thinking. So you're in Memphis now, doing some advisory work with the Cotton Trust Protocol. What does Cotton Trust Protocol mean to you and what they do?
Listen, the Cotton Trust Protocol has been a passion of mine before it had a name. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, when I was the Vice President of Technical Services at National Cotton Council, I could see, I had this vision. I knew that our customers wanted more, our customers, the brands and retailers. Because I was the one that called on and said, hey, we've got a, pick a name. I'm not going to name them, but they want to know more about agriculture. and about cotton. So I would go there and they would ask questions about, well, you know, we're customers, we're facing our clients, our customers buying our home furnishings and clothing and so on, and they want to know that the cotton is grown responsibly. And I would tell them how we grow cotton, and they said, that's a great story. Well, how many people are doing this practice? And my response was, well, a lot of, okay, not specific, because nobody really focused on that. And as I try to tell the story of how cotton is grown responsibly, and I would essentially develop the principles and criteria, principles, not criteria, the principles we use. And invariably, the Walmarts of the world, the VFs of the world, they'd say, that's a wonderful story, but where are the numbers? So I began years ago developing what I call a cotton cares program that had pretty much the same principles as our U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. And I asked farmers to volunteer to do a self-assessment. Tell me what you're doing on these practices. I would collect that. All of a sudden, I was getting data. I was getting numbers. Wasn't verified. It's simply telling the story. That was great. But typically then, farmers say, you know, I'm happy to fill out this data, give you this information, but I'm not getting paid for it. No, but it's helping me. It's helping me to promote your cotton. Later on, you know, it did not grab people. So later on, we worked on with a group, eventually to be field to market. I was at the very first table with multi-stakeholder groups with commodities, traders, food companies, NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, Nature Conservancy, several of those. And we were in this room, small room, in the basement of the Reagan office building. And we said, how can we do this? And we developed some principles of trying one more time as a multi-stakeholder group. First time a multi-stakeholder group started this. Said, what can we do to promote and show and promote better practices? And I discussed our Cotton Cares program, which I called it back then. And folks generally thought that was wonderful. World Wildlife Fund showed what they're doing. Cargill and other companies would develop what they're doing. And we said, well, let's find some principles of developing a program. Number one principle is that it'll be science-based. We will collect information, and it's got to be peer-reviewed. It's got to be data. So we worked on those principles. And the other thing is we would measure outcomes. So from day one, our principle for the field to market, when I say our principle field to market, I was at the very first table, so I lay some claim to it. We developed these programs, and then we moved into how do we develop this into a story? The things we can measure, and I really liked what my friend Jason Clay at World Wildlife Fund said. Let's choose the things that we can measure. Let's also choose the things we can agree on, and let's work on that first. So we elected land use efficiency, water use efficiency, energy, greenhouse gases, and developing those. We didn't put carbon on there early on because we had no way of measuring carbon, or we thought. So those are the things we focused on, developed what's called the field print, and we're using the same concept of a field print analysis now, where we go to a farmer, give us representative fields, and we'll enter all of the inputs that affect these things: your land, your water that you apply, your fertilizers, your plant protection chemicals. Each of those has a component. You might say you're doing a life cycle assessment of this field.
Mm-hmm. What year are we talking about that you're doing all this? What year?
This was actually probably 11 years ago when we started. By the mid 90s, by the year 2000, we had good models going.
So if you're saying mid to late 90s, early 2000s, you're on the sustainability bandwagon. You're driving it. Did you feel that you were?
We were driving it, and the beauty of that, it was multi-stakeholder. Every decision was by consensus. Our NGOs were in agreement. Our commodity groups were in agreement. Our trading groups were in agreement. The food groups were in agreement. So keeping this focus, this band of brothers and sisters together as we go down this path. And we grew into this. We grew into, okay, we have, how are we going to verify these things? So, okay, what kind of claims can we make? We began to develop rules on what you can say and what you can't say. All right, what you can say, you got to be able to back it up. That's a rule.
Well, it goes back to your initial conversation that you said you were having when you were like, oh, how many are doing this? And you're like, oh, a few. So you're, again, dipping into your background. You're taking an academic approach of with science for a greater good and a real life cause. I mean, you're doing those things that you had to do to get your undergraduate and graduate work. You couldn't just show up to present your thesis or your PhD dissertation without having things to back it up. Again, is that accurate?
Listen, I really love this. You're helping to summarize how I got here. I wasn't so sure, but you got it. Yeah.
So why is that important to have exact data and science that's backing things up and information that you can point to when you go and if you're in the Reagan building or the Longworth building, wherever you end up in DC and you're making this presentation? Why is data so important to what you're doing?
Well, it's important from several aspects. One, the data is important for farmers. And the environmental data was a new element that our farmer members had never really got their head around. So the data is important for our farmers to realize how he or she may be doing in this sustainability space. The notion was that farmers felt that they were put upon. They were told to do things because somebody in the world thinks it's a good idea. But once we started developing these tools and the farmers can see, that's my footprint for my kilogram of cotton or my pound of cotton. I can see the energy. And by the way, when we look at things like energy, that's not just the energy going into the fuel to run at the tractor. That's the energy going into that's embedded in the products. If you have a pound of fertilizer, it has energy that was developed in the mining of the fertilizer or in the processing or development of the materials. So that's embedded energy. The same with the plant protection products. Measuring greenhouse gases, for example. Well, there are greenhouse gases expelled in the manufacture of, say, nitrogen. So we capture those as part of, I call it our LCA.
I'm going to guess that right now you have producers since October, when the fertilizer prices started to spike up, that you had producers in the field who are looking at some of your data going, can I get by with 10% less, 30% less? They were already, is this Okay, let's use the political term. Is this crisis an opportunity to push sustainability forward dramatically, given some of the prices of some inputs?
That's exactly the conversation we're having now. By the way, you want a job? I've got somebody who has an understanding like that. That's precisely the conversation we have. We're not saying go change your nitrogen. We're saying with the price of nitrogen, let's fine tune our use of, I'll say nitrogen, our fertilizer, but nitrogen is in my crosshairs because of its cost. And also, it doesn't have the most friendly footprint. So if I can reduce a pound of nitrous oxide from going into the atmosphere, that's like reducing 300 pounds of CO2. So we have the additive effect. So as we are looking forward to growing our data, we can develop this data into eventually showing how we've made a change, we've captured that change, and then that becomes a market for providing our customers with data that our customer, like a major brand, can say, I've got a science-based target that's pegged to the Climate Paris Accord, where we want to reduce our emissions by 40% by 2030. And what we can do with our protocol cotton, say, okay, we can show you how using cotton with certain specifications can help you meet your scope 3 emission targets.
Right. You're
So-
winning on a whole lot of things right there.
So I think we are unique as far as a commodity or as a program to be able to connect those dots between a decision that the farmer makes on the field to a decision that a fashion brand will be able to say, I'm meeting our targets.
And we all want to understand a little bit more about where all of our inputs, and I don't just mean chemicals. I mean, you're talking like if you're fashion, where my cotton is coming from. I want to know where we are in an information era. So again, you seem to be just ahead of your time. Could you give me something else that maybe you're ahead of your time on that I can invest in, or I need some good advice here.
We are trying to be students of Wall Street. Because Wall Street they sometimes naively are paying for things that perceive to be good for the environment. Well, if Wall Street's interested in that, we need to be sure we're in position for Wall Street to know it. Other things, we tend to talk about the environmental metrics. One thing I've learned that social trumps environment. If you look around the world with not just agriculture, the use and abuse of people, it still happens. And the fact that in our protocol, we have one of our principles is fair treatment of people, worker well-being. And even though we in the US, we have lots of laws to help us, it's not sufficient for us marking our cotton and say, oh, we're from the US, so we don't have those problems. Well, generally that's the case, but our customers around the world read an article of maybe some worker, maybe not cotton, not being paid properly. And they said to Andy, okay, but how do you know? So part of our requirement in our protocol is that our farmers attest to the fact that they are paying fair wages without regard to gender or sexual orientation or any other factor where there might be a differential in wages. They pay for quality work. Yeah, you can pay for seniority as long as you define that. How do you assure that? Well, we will have a verification. part of our protocol requires verification, and it's not 100% in any one year, because you ought to do every farmer, but eventually every farmer will have an own farm visit, and the verifier, the third party control union, is our outfit doing the verification, and they will go in and visit and look for verification that the rates of fertilizer the farmers using are right. They'll look around the office and, well, how can you assure us that the farmers know what the rules and regulations are? And they're showing the posters of the equal EEOC on the wall, equal employment.
Mm-hmm.
What about the safety? Well, here are the safety programs that we provide. So what about your employment policy? And usually we want that written, or the contracts. So they look at the data for the verifier to be comfortable.
Andy, I have to interrupt, but I want to go back to your academic side about verification and data. So am I giving my name out if my farm is participating in this and you're blasting it everywhere?
That's up to the farmer. No, we're not advertising the names of the farmer. If the farmer wants his or her name, that's fine for them. The data absolutely is private. We collect the data, but we do not provide the data to anyone except back to the farmer himself or herself.
To better understand their own situation is what you're saying.
Their own situation. The farmer owns the data. We use aggregated data to help to build the story of U.S. Trust Protocol. So when our customer says, we want to see the data, they're looking at the data of the aggregate of all million bales of protocol cotton this year.
Now, I also interrupted you when you were talking about verification of this data. How does that happen?
We're using a third-party control union, and a small percentage of the farmers will be in a protocol, will be elected for the joy of having a third-party verification. We don't call it an audit. It's not an audit. It's a verification. It's an easy verification. It's not a shoe-in. They have to show some reasonable evidence that they're following the principles outlined in our criteria. And this visit is one, first of all, the verifiers to do one thing. That's to verify what we're saying about the protocol. They are not instructed to look around and say, hey, I see your windmill is crooked there. That's off limits. They're to focus just on the data. And it's not that difficult. When we say, if you use the term audit, that means that somebody's going and look at all the numbers. Well, we look at the numbers to the extent that, yeah, those are being recorded. We don't go in and get out a big Excel spreadsheet and develop something, say, aha, I've got you. It's none of that. Farmers have found that this audit is relief to them. It's a learning process. And I was given an example earlier about some of the washroom facilities. A farmer said, oh, yeah, I've got that, but we're improving those. So they were able to look at where the improvements are going on. So we're looking at the fundamentals there to address things like forced labor. Do you ask a farmer? Some of our farmers are and should be offended. We ask them to verify they're not using forced labor. But you know what? We're competing in a world where there's forced labor in many parts of the world, and we're continue to differentiate ourselves from that. So the experiences that growers have had with the verification is good for them. They're enjoying that.
Yeah, I think the first time we had a conversation here with one of your colleagues at the Trust Protocol is that was a story that was starting to emerge out of China, that U.S. companies were boycotting product that was coming under forced labor. And again, global issues push topics and accelerate them in a hurry. It doesn't seem that want by companies has gone away. They don't want to be a part of something that doesn't align with their core mission. So how do you best tell, talk to the producers that are watching this. How do you verify and say to these companies, hey, this is legit stuff here done following these 6 things in the United States in the cotton producers? How do you best, besides data, ensure to those businesses that they should be doing business in the U.S.?
Well, that's we talk about data, but we also discuss our verification, our practices, and the fact that our farmers are attesting to the fact that in our worker well-being, the workers are treated fairly. And there's a third party to say, yes, we verify that the farmers are treating their workers fairly. The good news is we have not had major issues. If we find there's some nuance that might not be technically correct, there's a peer said, listen, work on this, whatever small issue it is. If it's a major issue, no, the farmer is not in the protocol. But we have not found any major issues.
Good to hear. What's the next step here as we wrap up, get towards the end of our discussion? Give me one final pitch about, if I'm a producer, why I should be enrolling in this.
Listen, the big deal is for us to promote the responsibly grown cotton. We need access to markets. And here's the thing. If we say, I will only do this if I'm paid for it, I understand that, but we're paid in access to markets. There's some markets right now, unless we have a program, a standards program, you don't play in that market. They're table stakes. I'm not a poker player, but I understand the ante. They're table stakes that you must play. Now, right now, farmers say, I'm selling every bale of cotton I make. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is next year there are going to be markets. And if there are other programs, other initiatives around the world that can say, if you can't get your cotton from the U.S., I've got Cotton Made in Africa that has a program. We've got Cotton Connect. We've got other competing growths. Brazil has its program. We've got to play, and we've got to play to provide this data, and it's not that difficult. Once they get into the program, it's a matter of tweaking and updating and looking in the future. It's also positioning our farmers to really begin to get additional money. I'm talking every day with areas of wanting to pay money for ecosystem services. And that means that the changes that a farmer makes on the farm, we are able to monetize what we're doing for habitat enhancements. We're able to monetize what we're doing to reduce water use per pound. We're doing things to monetize the reduction of greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. And monetize it means the farmer gets paid an additional value.
Sounds like a good opportunity. Really, the last question, and it's the hardest one. Georgia and Clemson are playing in the national championship football game. Who are you cheering for?
Oh, you can't go there.
You can't lose. Look at it this way. Say it this way, Andy. You can't lose.
I can't lose. Absolutely. Right now, I'm going with Georgia because they got the best prospect.
They do. Yeah, they do. Dr. Andrew Jordan, thank you so very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. It's been a joy. Bye-bye.
If you want to enroll in what Dr. Jordan is talking about with the Cotton Trust Protocol, you have until the end of April. Head to their website, as that has been extended for the rest of April. I'm Paul Yeager. Thanks for watching. If you have any feedback for me, market at iowapbs.org. Like, subscribe, follow, share, whatever you want to do. I thank you, and we'll see you next time.